Hello, I'm William Moner, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Communications and the Interactive Media Master's Program here at Elon. In this video, I will be discussing the importance of the open source and web development communities, focusing primarily on creative production capabilities for view on any web-enabled device. The languages of the web have become de facto standards for development on all types of devices and for many creative purposes. Thanks to the model of the open web developed and maintained by an ever-growing community of software developers, contemporary designers and storytellers are able to use, reuse, and share their creative work in a variety of ways. The languages of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript underpin many of these creative projects. Journalists, writers, designers, content strategists, and storytellers have been exploring these technologies as ways to present creative content in novel and inventive ways. The web is 25 years old. What started out as a document linking system quickly evolved into a full multimedia and hypermedia system that supports interactivity and rich media engagement. We now are able to use the capabilities of HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript to produce interactive media across multiple platforms and devices for a variety of purposes. The web browser takes center stage in this world of design, and the code used by designers and developers is not only machine-readable, but human-readable. The technologies at use in the web browser are formed through the collective efforts of contributors to a large and active open-source community dedicated to the advancement of web-based technologies, and this community provides a wealth of resources to those willing to take the leap and read the source code. If you've been away from web design or development for a few years, the rapid pace of change in this industry may seem bewildering. This sequence of presentations and discussions is intended to demystify the web development community and the technologies at play on the modern web. The web browser is constructed to support the core languages of HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. These three languages apply in the following ways. HTML, or hypertext markup language, provides document structure by using elements. CSS provides the capacity for document style, and JavaScript forms the behavioral layer of the browser's capabilities. All of these technologies converge for use in a web browser. Another way of thinking about these languages is to consider them as interrelated. I like house building analogies, so let's think of these in terms of raw materials. HTML provides the bricks, framing, drywall, fixtures, and other raw materials. CSS permits you to change the colors of these elements, making them larger or smaller, changing their dimensions, giving them simple animated features like rotation and scale, and more. JavaScript adds a logical layer that permits you to add variables, use if-then logic, provide interactive feedback, handle advanced interactions in game features like tallying a score or tracking a scroll bar's movement, and much, much more. Wherever an HTML element is used, JavaScript and CSS can make that element do almost anything imaginable in the web browser. The irony of web design is that for all of the visually appealing and interactive capabilities of the platform, the entire system is predicated on text-based representation of complex objects. And all of this text, all of the HTML, all the CSS, all the JavaScript is 100% readable using the web browser you have installed on your system. To create web experiences, you need nothing more than a good text editor and simple image editing software. Every web browser includes a method to view the document source. And within this document source, you can see how the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is rendered in the browser. Google Chrome, Firefox, and even Safari offer developers tools for free to help both designers and developers write better code. By its very nature, the web is open source. And the community that has embraced this ethos has built some of the most exciting and innovative technologies that take advantage of the particular affordances of the web. In the videos to follow, I will walk you through some of the new features available for the web and browsers, and I'll introduce you to the communities, tools, and resources available to you as you learn about the capabilities of the contemporary web browser and communication technologies. As I had mentioned in my introduction, there's a very robust community of web developers who are actively creating the types of experiences that we see online every day. And one of the sites that many developers use to test out new ideas is a site called CodePen. The site is at codepen.io. And CodePen is a wonderful resource for somebody who is not only just starting out in web design and web development, but even seasoned developers can learn new things from this site. And so I'd like to take you through just a brief demo of what you can find on this site and how you can use this site to develop your skills on your own and on your own time. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to log in to my own account. And my login account is associated with GitHub. Now, GitHub is a social coding community as well, but it's oriented towards basically all of computer science. So anybody who is a programmer, a coder, anybody who's working on anything from HTML all the way through to back-end stuff and even software development, you use GitHub as a way to work with other people, share code, save revisions of code, and all of these sorts of things. Now, because I already have logged in on GitHub here on this machine, my user account is now affiliated here. So I can go over to here and see all of my CodePen, what are called pens here. And so you can see that this very simple experiment has 114 views on it, has no discussion, and has and I have not as of yet hearted this thing. Now, if I wanted to just simply play around with what already exists, I'm going to click back to the main page for CodePen. And one of the nice things is that you can just go in and check out how somebody has put together a very small but very functional experience on this site. So what I'm going to do is to go to the popular side of things. And what I want to do is take a look at some cool navigation. And so one of the more popular ways of handling website navigation is this sticky header navigation. And part of the challenge with modern web design is to create something that is going to work on multiple devices. So this particular one that I'm pointing to here, responsive sticky header navigation, I want to take a look at. It has 2,059 views, it has 83 likes, and it has 3 comments on it. The developer's name is listed here. It looks like a guy named Mark has put this one together. And that's the name of the person who put together the pen, but not necessarily the person who put together the actual demonstration. This is what's challenging about this environment, is that even though you might encounter somebody who has put together a cool little thing, you might not actually know who the author is until you go back through that chain of code and figure out what's going on. Okay, so let's take a look at what this pen is actually doing. So I have this I'm a cool navigation, and I'm going to use my scroll wheel on my mouse to just scroll down. And after I get to a certain point, the navigation bar suddenly magically shows up. Now, if I want to go into here and click through the sections, I can click on each one of these and move through sections. It's a nice scrolling style site. If I click on PF, I can get all the way back up to the top, and once I hit the top of the page, the navigation disappears. So very, very modern, very functional way of navigating around websites. Now here's where the trick is with CodePen, is that you have full view of all of the functional code and not any of the header type of code, the types of stuff that you would have to put into a web page in order for this entire thing to work. But we'll get to that in a second. So the way that CodePen works is that you get a view of the HTML, which is on the left-hand side. You get the view of the CSS, which is in the middle, and you get the view of your JavaScript, which is on the right-hand side. Now, underneath all of these little gears are settings for each one of these things. As I mentioned before, HTML is essentially like a building blocks scenario where you have things that can be styled by CSS and things that can be made functional through JavaScript. So HTML gives us our blueprint, our boxes that we can work with. So over here, you see some of the things that are being used. You have a link to a style sheet that handles a font that's coming in here. You have a link to a style sheet that is external to this page that is going to be using certain aspects of style. And then you have a link to a Jquery library that's available to enable some more advanced functions in JavaScript. Now with this particular pen, the user has not chosen to use any one of these additional HTML processors. There are 3 or 4 different HTML preprocessors that can be used. One is called Haml, one is called Markdown, one is called Slim, and one is called Jade. If you have any questions as to what any of these are, you can always just mouse over one of these and click the question mark, and it will take you out to the information page for something like Haml. And Haml is a preprocessor for HTML. It essentially takes some of the guesswork out of putting together your HTML tags and makes it a little bit more line item functional, so you can see that there's some distinctions between what regular HTML looks like and what a Haml file looks like. In any case, sometimes when things don't look like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript inside CodePen, you have to take a look at these little gears to see what's going on. So as you can see, none is highlighted here, and that's exactly what this user is doing. Under CSS, if we look at the gear, you also see none. With CSS, there are several preprocessors that handle some of the more common functions in CSS. If you have a lot of animation, or if you have things that need to work cross-browser, sometimes you'll use a preprocessor to handle some of that heavy lifting for you. And 2 or 3 of the more popular ones that I know of are Sass, SCSS, and Less. And each one of those is well worth your time if you're going to go into web development. But if you aren't, it's just good to be aware that what you're seeing in CodePen might not actually be what you need to see in your code, and you might have to look elsewhere for the types of things that will help you. So the pen that I've chosen to show you uses no other HTML processor, it uses no other CSS processor, and it uses no other JS processor, no other JavaScript processor. This is kind of a head fake, if you will, because over here on the left-hand side, we can see that it is using Jquery, and it's pulling Jquery from the Jquery website at code.jquery.com. If you're not familiar with Jquery, Jquery is a library that you can use. And I'll just pop out to Jquery really quickly. It's a JavaScript library that allows you to do many of the common things that JavaScript allows you to do, but in a much more simplified style of language. And there are tons of demos, and there are tons of things that you can explore on jquery.com to try this out and to see what you can make with Jquery. There are several people who work with Jquery, or there are several companies that work with Jquery, and it's really a time saver and very wonderful. And as a matter of fact, Adobe's Adobe Edge Animate now uses Jquery as its engine for animation and interactivity on the web. So even these big name players are putting their muscle and their weight behind these JavaScript libraries such as Jquery. When I take a look at this, you can see that there are a couple other variants of JavaScript. There's CoffeeScript and LiveScript. Both of those are variants of JavaScript. So the 3 languages that I mentioned at the beginning, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, if you start to learn those and get very effective with them, you're well on your way to learning the inner workings of web development. Now, I don't want to dissect this entire pen. What I want to say is that you can easily take some of this code and start to figure out what's happening in this code and see exactly what is at play between the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. As we look through the HTML code, you'll see that many of the sections that we see, you have the class for the logo and this PF that is going to come in here. So you have this, you have your navigation bar that is going to have your 4 sections tagged to them. You have what is now termed a hero graphic, which is this graphic right here. And so the container for that hero graphic is right here. And you can see the text that says "I'm a cool navigation" is there. And then as I mouse down, there's a little mouse telling me to scroll on the scroll wheel. So that is in a class, and there's a little span in there. So these are all building blocks that allow us to work with this web page in a certain way. Now, here's what's so much fun about CodePen. This is not a static environment. So if I want to play around with this, and if I want to change this to demonstration, you'll notice that the screen automatically refreshes after a second or two and actually gives me all of the changes that I'm putting up in this section here. So I can start to work with this right away. And if I wanted to say Elon iMedia and put that into place, and I wanted to do a very basic mock-up of my, a new website that we might be doing. We have products, we might have services, we might have staff, and we might have contact. And if I just wanted to see what this looked like in here, you'll notice that now I can change some of these things around, and you're getting a very functional looking website right here in this window. Now that's some of the basics. Those are some of the things that we can pretty easily cover. As we look into the CSS, there are a ton of different settings that you can play around here, and I'm not in the position right now to show you all of the things that CSS can do. But I want to show you that this tool can be really very, very wonderful if you need to just simply change a font around. So I'll switch this to Arial, and it will refresh, and you can see that the typography here has changed for the main section to Arial. That's right here in the navigation here. And there are a couple other places where there are transformations and things that are put into place here as well. So if I wanted to find anything where there was a font family and make a change, so I'll change this to something I'm fairly familiar with. I'll just do Arial again. And you'll notice that now this text has changed to Arial. If I want to change back, I can actually just undo. I can hit Command Z on the keyboard. And so this is a really slick live editing environment where you can really test out some things. Now, if you really like this, particular thing that you're putting together and you're playing around with it, it's making sense to you, what you can do is you can simply heart this to like it. And you can also fork it, which means that you can copy it to your own protected public space on CodePen. And the key here is public, that everything that it's on CodePen is going to be shared with other people. And you can start to make those changes a little bit more permanent. After I make different changes here, I can click Save, and that would save those various things out to my pen. And so I can really tweak and play around with these things. Now, this is not a full-fledged code editor. This is a really great way to play around with some ideas and figure out how exactly you're going to put these things together. Okay? So once I have this thing forked to my section, what I can do is go into my own profile and see where I have placed these things. And if I click on Forked, you can see the things that I have forked into my own pen repository here. And so I have this cool little graphic that has a spinner that shows this nice pie chart. And I really liked this. I thought it was a really wonderful little piece of code. And so I decided to save that for my own purposes. As I mentioned, this was the CodePen displayed earlier with this little cool demonstration of this navigation bar that's sticky here. And if I really am happy with how this has worked out, if I click share, I have a number of different options. I can tweet, like, or G+ it. I can send it to my cell phone if I want to test it out on a mobile site, and I get 10 of those per month, which is really handy. I can get direct links to the code itself, to the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript code itself. So if I click on one of these, let's say I want to click on the HTML, I can see all of the HTML that is part of the CodePen, but in a plain text type of view, which is wonderful. And I can take this into my favorite text editor and mess around with it there. or I can just download the entire zip itself. And so when I do that, if I download the entire zip, it's going to come down to the bottom here. And let me move this up so you can see it. I get this little zip file, and I click on this. It will expand it. And if I go into Finder, I bring up Finder, then everything that is associated with this CodePen is available here. And so if I double click on index.html, it's going to open up Firefox. But nonetheless, here is that entire piece of code just right there, right in my browser. So even if it's something that somebody has constructed, you'll be able to take a look at it. And what's nice, but the big selling point of this thing was that it was supposed to be responsive, and it's roughly responsive. It responds to the size of the screen. It has a little hamburger menu over here that tilts out and hides my navigation and everything like that. So very quickly, I've gone from having zero knowledge of CodePen to pulling an entire repository of code down and working with it and making it my own. And I think this is of great value to somebody who is just trying to figure out how all of this stuff works, and gives you a real chance to play around with the code in a very easy environment.